It's Tarot Tuesday again. My name is Shannon Douglas, and this week I'm going to do a summary of Tarot Tuesdays as we've covered so far. I started the series looking at tarot in a little different way than I think lots of tarot practitioners and readers do. And so I'm going to cover some ground there in the video. Now, make sure if you have any comments as we go along, something pops into your mind or you've got a question, give me a comment. I'm happy to chat with you. And if you haven't subscribed already to my channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for notifications. I run another series called Soul Mapping a couple of times a week in slightly longer and different format than Tarot Tuesdays. Today, let's start with what we covered last week, and that was I actually did a whole week of the Hermit. I did Hermit on Tarot Tuesdays, and I did a soul mapping video about the nature of the Logos, the spirit guide, and what I believe the broader symbolic representations are or meanings are underlying the Hermit card. And it's the representation in the classical Greek virtues, the four of them, of courage, wisdom, temperance, and justice. The Hermit card is arguably the wisdom card. It's the culmination of the hero's journey on the individual or the internal development scale or process. And when we get into the higher arcana after the Wheel of Fortune, we get into the encounters and the archetypes of the world out there. But everything so far has happened inwardly. And when I jump in here, I want to introduce you to my friend Harry. When this picture was taken, Harry was about 10 weeks old. He joined a family member's household, very excited and excitable Morky. Harry, at that time, he's not that much bigger now, but at the time, as a very young puppy, as you can imagine, full of energy and one of the great joys of life. And if you look at the Fool card, the traditional Fool card in the Rider-Waite or the Coleman-Smith deck, there is a little white dog in the Fool card, and we have the individual. And the stepping off a cliff to me is coming into a new realm. It's going into the unknown, and that little companion is our instinct. At that stage, when we're born, we really have no sense of self or faculties. We can't even find our fingers and toes for the first couple of months, and nevertheless, as we come into consciousness and we're incarnated in a physical body in this world, into a localized consciousness that's human being, that's us, we have this instinct that comes along with us, and that instinct comes up from the lower orders of nature. Believe it or not, we have animal instincts within us still, primal drives like our territorial sense and our erotic impulses and our emotive and caring responses. They're hardwired into us, and that comes from billions or millions of years of human evolution, and the last 200,000 years, as we can tell, in this more or less configuration. So this white dog represents our instinct and to some extent our intuition. It's a bridge, or it's our, well, it acts just like a puppy. And as a puppy gets a little bit older, we start to train the puppy. Basic stuff like peeing on the mat where you're supposed to pee, or getting used to holding the bladder and being able to go for a walk and not pooping behind the couch and getting in all kinds of trouble. And puppy learns to sit and to roll over and to get down, and et cetera, and we train that part of ourselves to give us the kinds of responses that we need. And that little companion grows with us in its maturity as we grow. Now, there are numerous cultures in the world that make reference to this part of us as an animal, a spirit guide, or an animal companion. And in the rich traditions of the indigenous people of North America, their animal spirits, and I'm going to talk a little bit about memory and soul mapping later this week. Their animal spirits represent or give them language around particular patterns of behavior. So if someone has a spirit guide that is a wolf, for example. We'll keep it in the canine theme. The wolf or the canine would be a loving companion. It's a pack animal. It wants a relationship with an alpha, and it will use its senses, eyes, ears, a sense of smell, taste, and even sense of the environment to protect and serve the pack. And so the fool and the dog comprise this. They're a pack, and as we come into this incarnation, in at least in our culture, we don't have the language around spirit guide, and so we don't develop a relationship with this beyond childhood. Now, we may well, and I don't know about you, but I've talked to a number of people, and I myself have had an experience of having an imaginary friend as a child. Children will imbue toys and scenes and things, and having a tea party, and have the dolls will have conversations with each other, or the trucks and race cars will be imbued with mana, and we put our imaginations into those things, and we create a non-reality or an imaginary space, and we forget that in the culture that we're in. Other cultures keep it as part of their normal vernacular, so that as you're growing up, you have a companion, a spirit guide that will help you it will protect you, and it protects us in a number of different ways. I studied NLP a long time ago, and in NLP they say we've got about 2.3 or 2.4 million bits of information coming into our system every second. There's incredible amount of information in our environment. Frequently we see online people say, well, we only see 1% of the light spectrum, a very, very tiny part, the colors of the rainbow, essentially, when we go from gamma radiation all the way up to infrared in wavelengths of radiation. That's the light spectrum. So we only perceive a certain with our eyes a certain spectrum of the environment around us, only that which is important and salient to us, and we get all these bits of information coming in, 2.4 million, but our conscious minds can really only handle, it's like 134 according to NLP when I studied it, and then we have to categorize that information to make sense of it. So out of those millions of bits of sensory data coming into our system every second, we have to have a part of us that can help us focus on what's salient and important to us in the moment. We've got to train the dog a little bit, and give it some patience, and it will help us navigate through life. It's part of our attentional switching mechanism. And it has a bunch of filters in it that, like, it can store some of our fears, and it can store some of our hopes. It can store our limiting beliefs. It can, if we grow up and we learn negative self-talk, or we internalize the shit that other people, another person, a broken person, would give to a child, negative self-talk for them to internalize, and criticism. And psychological abuse, then what happens is our companion, just like a dog that's raised in an abusive environment, can be unpredictable, can be highly reactive, or not wanting to interact. It carries the wounds, and that part of us also carries the sins. It carries the guilt and the bad decisions and the regrets and the negative stuff if we allow it. Now, on the other side of it, it carries our hopes and dreams. If we know how to build a relationship with this part of us, this companion guide, then we can give it instructions, and we can collaborate with it. There is a language that it has. There's a communication methodology to connect with this part of ourselves, and we can help to train it so that it orients us to salient information in our environment, and it goes beyond what we can rationally consider. This is the part of us that is responsible for what Carl Jung talked about in his ideas of synchronicity. This is the part of us that works well outside of our conscious awareness, and guides us and protects us and points things out to us that we have told it are important to us. So this is the function of our psyche that is responsible for what people talk about in the law of attraction. So we go through this process. We come into the world. We have this companion. The magician is the pattern. It's the four elements. The priestess is the material. So we have the matter and the pattern. That's the correct way of articulating this, I think, for now. We get into the masculine and feminine archetypes in the Empress and the Emperor. We get into the rules of society, the churches, the culture, the social mores and norms in the Hierophant. 6 gives us the structure of the psyche itself, the conscious mind, the unconscious mind, and the superconscious mind. The structure of the conscious mind in the masculine, the unconscious mind in the feminine, the higher self, the relationship in there, the mediator of that relationship is that companion that we have. It will point our attention to the psychic world that we know and understand from the Priestess card, and it will point and orient our senses in the material world, in the physical world of the magician. How do I think about that? In any case, we have the Lover's card. We've got internal conflict and parts of ourselves that have different agendas that we recognize as we get a little bit older. And then we have the Strength card, where we are testing our boundaries and pushing our limits, and we're rebelling against structures and parents, and as we're getting into our teenagers, but we're also proving to ourselves what we can accomplish. So private victory before public victory. And if we can go through a process of growth and learning from our encounters of our boundaries as we get older, then we incorporate the Strength. Then we finally get to the Hermit. Now notice in none of the other cards, in cards 1 through 9, the dog appears, the companion appears. But the implication from the Fool card at the beginning is, on this fool's journey, on the journey of our lifetime, we have this companion and it's unseen. Now, the Hermit has tamed and built a relationship with this creature, with this part of us, with our nature, that is to the same degree as we understand from mythology, where a magician or a witch or a priestess would have some kind of animal familiar. The connection is that strong. And because we've dealt with all the underlying unconscious stuff, the internal conflicts and the sense of confidence in the Courage card or the Strength card, and we know our who we are in terms of our expression in the world and our role in society, the Hermit removes himself or herself from society with the familiar and now has this ally. Now, a little bit of a bonus. This ally is known in cultures all over the world. And I haven't talked about this before, but I'm going to talk about it more in soul mapping this week. That individual spirit guide that we have, I'm going to call one of the logoi. And what I mean by that is that there is a very old concept of the logos, or the logos. And that is word coming into reality. And it represents, the logos is connected with the new moon and the dawning sun on March 21st, the spring equinox. And it is coming into being, its birth. It's the Aleph letter of the Hebrew alphabet or the Phoenician alphabet. That is corresponds to the Fool card, incidentally. And the logos is this notion of coming into being, and we have numerous different deities that are associated with this, one of whom is Hermes, where we get the name, the word hermit from. And Hermes is connected with the logos. and he is the bringer of messages. He is the messenger of the gods. He is the creator of language and writing and symbol, and is responsible for communication in business and in the environment that we're in commerce. Now, this communication that we think about externally, but the communication that we're talking about, the logos, is what this spirit guide, this logoi, brings us. And the logos, represented by Hermes, represented also by Tote. Tote is known as thrice great, and by Mercury, of course, and Quicksilver, and there's representations of this god all over the world. And this god sort of has authority or dominion over an area or an aspect of our lives, but also an aspect of our consciousness or our unconsciousness. And the sort of microcosmic role within our psyche of the logos at the level of gods is this spirit guide. And the plural of logos, I think, is logoi. So we have the logos and the logoi. Logos as above, logoi so below, our own spirit guide. And the hermit is the stage of life and development and wisdom where we've reached and we've developed the rich connected relationship with that familiar, that part of us which tunes our attention to the world and points us in the right direction. It is a level of self-knowledge to understand all the different components of the psyche and to be aware of how they function. So it's not just a relationship with the spirit guide, but a relationship with a number of other different forces and natural energies that we all experience, like I mentioned earlier. The erotic impulse and procreative drive, and our hardwired capacity to care for and nurture and be part of complex communities, and the aggression drive, the energy of Mars and war and conflict, and others. So the logoi, our personal logos, is what connects us to those different aspects of our lives and helps us to work with them and relate to them. So it is an intermediary. Hermes is known as the Lord of the Crossroads. He's a liminal spirit, which means he is a god of boundaries. And the boundary, as we know, the logos, is no thought to thought. And when we think about it in terms of the new moon or the equinox, spring equinox, and the letter Aleph, the sound of the word Aleph is interesting in the way it's created, or we create it in our throats. It begins with an aspiration, an expiration, exhalation. We exhale somewhat silently, and we can put a sibilance on that. We can create some vibration, and we can make a ha sound. But then the first sound that comes from the bottom of the vocal cords in the lungs is ah, and it is the sound of it's the exhaling. It's the first vowel. It's also the first vowel or vowel sound of the sound of Om, or the totality of the universe. But sticking with the Aleph for now. The Aleph is associated with those dates. It's associated with the Fool card, and its medicine, its understanding of our creative capacity is held in the Hermit card, who has gone through the whole of the inward process of development towards wisdom. I really didn't look at my notes once. Hey, if this is curious to you, you've got questions or comments, you'd like to give me some feedback, love to hear from you in the comments. Make sure if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I'm going to talk more about this logos and logoi in my soul mapping video later this week. And make sure you hit the bell, I guess, for notifications of when new videos come up.